All right. Oh, that's adorable. Okay. So, guys, you may remember Harley, our
Mr. Bear.
our our professional Mr. Bear with his little tie. He's helping me deliver the word of Jesus today.
He's an evangelist.
He is an evangelist. Okay. So, continuing our series about, you know, kind of things relating to the spiritual offices and kind of them functioning in the roles that they're meant to do and kind of the giftings that come with it, attributes of them that really honestly are important for a time like this when everything's kind of like in such a state of disarray. We talked about so far, I've shared about kind of the white knight thing, the saving the day that's kind of intrinsic to evangelists and apostles, and how important that is, and how we should help kind of like come around each other and and value that. And we've also talked about caretaking, the way that shepherds and teachers do it, and how they really just do that. This today, this message, which will probably be going up before another one comes up shortly thereafter, um, tomorrow-ish or something. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, today it's about truth seeking and the incredible importance of that. And there are three offices that really like revolve around this. And if you go back to the Office series, I talked a lot about I made a lot of comments about evangelists and shepherds and how their relationship with the truth is not always so pure, shall we say.
Yeah, it's just not the same.
They don't obsess over it. They're more interested in function as opposed to the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like Harley, he's an evangelist. He's not really interested in the truth. He's much more interested in what works.
He will tell you that he is the truth. And you will agree because he's cute.
It's true. This face. I will probably end up feeding him just because he's doing the thing.
Yeah.
You guys get a little glimpse of this right here. That face. It's not even fair. Anyway, this will probably end up being the most viewed video, and it's all because of you, Harley. Anyway,
Evangelism, I like that.
so I make these comments, and it's not to be disparaging. It's just kind of this reality of where the focuses stand. However, being focused on the truth is really like the place of apostles, prophets, and teachers, but mostly prophets and teachers. Like, if there's a third, it's not a third wheel kind of situation. Each video I've talked about, the two kind of like primary offices that function in this, and of course we're all interested in the truth, right? All of us. And every office has that part to an extent. Even though those two I mentioned might be a little bit more fluid with it, if the truth meets their goals, they'll very much so use it. I feel bad saying that, but I also have a lot of information and a lot of evidence to back it up. However, for prophets, teachers, and apostles, all three of them are very much so focused on the truth. Now, back when I was doing the Office series, we did talk a lot about we talked about some of the conflicts that we run into, like the five offices and how certain ones tend to conflict with others more. And this truth-seeking thing is actually why I've said before that, if evangelists and shepherds are the most at odds with each other, teachers and prophets are the most at odds with each other. And this is the reason why. Because both of them have this intrinsic desire and focus on finding the truth in all things. The problem is that they come at it from different angles. See, teachers, as it were, people who have the office of teacher, and again, this is all generalities. It's not actually so cut and dry as this. Same in both cases. But where teachers draw their truth is from what they can absorb in the world and in the situations and everything around them. So you think of it like books is probably the easiest way. They're going to read the Bible specifically, and that's where they're going to draw as much truth about God as they can. And they're going to be able to, most of them are able to just, find you scripture and passage and know it inside and out. And they're going to know that they'll obsessively look over the Greek and the Hebrew. I mean, I remember when I was going to Bridgetown, and when John Mark Comer is kind of like the classic example of somebody who's from the office of teacher. The man, when he described the way that he approaches the Bible every week before he does a message, he will sit there, he'll read through, he'll lock himself in his study. This is something that he described while up on stage at one point. He'll lock himself in his study and read through the scriptures that he's using for the week in multiple different translations, including looking at the original Hebrew or the original Greek, depending on where it is, if it's, Old Testament or New Testament respectively, and to just really try his best to absorb the fullest and most clear meaning that he can possibly derive from that passage, from the scriptures in the Bible.
He is seeking the knowledge of truth.
Exactly. He is seeking the knowledge of truth. That's a really good way to put it. He values bringing forward the most absolute, clear truth that he can. And this is something that you find with teachers in general. They want that. They're not interested in general, they're not interested in how they feel.
Sensing and feeling.
Right. How they sensing and feeling, how they feel about the truth. They're interested in what's there. So they're going to draw from those things. And it's not just that. I once had it described to me that the way teachers kind of work is that they kind of draw from the other offices. Like in a fivefold ministry situation, they kind of draw from the other offices as well as from the Bible, and they kind of pull from the ground, as it were, everything that's here around them in order to fully grasp and bring forward a clearer picture of the truth. Prophets, on the other hand, go the other way. They're oftentimes much more intuitive, and what it is they receive stuff, they pick up patterns, they put things together.
The power of the truth.
The power of the truth. usually, like, so in the more typical kind of church setting, because that's kind of where we're focused. I'm not too, I don't feel like we're supposed to, like, try to spend a lot of time on, like, talking about, like, immature prophets who, they're not really, like, in tune with God. We're talking about, those who are. And especially when we talk about this group and the people watching these videos from said group, from Refuge, you know, y'all, all the prophets in the group, y'all hear from God just fine. Like, you do. So I don't need to delve into the other part so much. But the point is that, like, you receive stuff from God. Knowledge comes from God. Words come from God. You very clearly get messages and information and words of knowledge and all these different things that just come from God, and that's where the truth comes from. It's like God just downloads stuff. You don't even know why you just know. You'll start talking about some random thing with somebody, and you have no idea that you're literally just unpacking their entire life history. You're reading their mail, as Heather likes to put it. They don't know either. They're just like, okay, this person knows me. That's weird. And that actually, and that's the truth that they bring forward. And, like, for a lot of prophets, it's a fun kind of thing in that, like, they don't know. They don't even know that they're telling this stuff. But they do know that when God gives them a clear message, it's true. Whatever they're getting, if it's clearly from God, it's got to be true. And this, of course, is where the problems come in between the two of them. Between teachers and prophets. My prophets, I mean, Stephanie, Dusty, Heather, how many times have you, like, Josh, how many times have you guys, like, given a word, some word of knowledge, something that God just shared, and you share that thing, and then suddenly you have some person show up, Bible in hand, telling you chapter and verse why you're wrong.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And even though you know that you clearly got a word from God, they don't. And they're clearly missing the point. And they're quoting some obscure scripture to try to tell you that you're wrong. And they might have completely missed the intention or the purpose behind said word. So you're like, okay, God gave me this word about this thing, and they're coming at you with, like, some obscure passage out of, like, Ezekiel that has nothing to do with what you're talking about. And suddenly you're just like, dude, that's not what this was about. Yeah, well, you're wrong because you quoted it this way, and this is how God talks. I know I've had more than enough of those. I've also been the other guy. A few times. The point is that there is this issue that comes up. And on the other end, having playing the devil's advocate a little bit, because I have been the other guy, you hear some person get up on stage and, like, share something that just makes absolutely no sense. Or it like grates up against something that you've read from the Bible that's supposed to be true, because most people believe the idea that, that they believe in the infallibility of Scripture. So if it's in the Bible, you have to treat it as though it's the actual words of God Himself. I've done messages about the issues with that. Anyway, the point is that in that kind of situation, all you have is, that person's, like, they're at risk now because they might be giving a false prophecy that's dangerous for them just as much as it's dangerous for the people around them. I gotta go help. Axe hand, because axe hand means you're helping.
Yeah, their understanding of the truth is different.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing. That right there is exactly the thing. We have two very different understandings of the truth. We're coming from two very different perspectives. And then we add apostles in, because they're also obsessed with the truth. Now, I would love to say that apostles are like, the midline here, and they're like going to help everybody see the truth. No, that's not even remotely true. Usually what it is that apostles have the kind of like prophetic aspect, because even what I talk about with when we talked about the apostles in the Office series, one of the things about apostles is that they're not really apostles per se. They don't really come to life until they have Christ, just like prophets. A prophet without prophecy isn't really a prophet. Even though they have the office, they're not really active yet. Same is true with apostles. They're not really active until they have the gift of prophecy, in a way. Like, even if it's like seeing, like a seer's gift or something like that, whatever they need to be able to like have that vision from God. And this is where we talk about their truth and that issue. See, while prophets are receiving from God, teachers are receiving from inspiration, the Bible, and all these kinds of like from the ground. Apostles do sit somewhere in the middle, but for the most part, what they receive does come from God. But it's oftentimes coming at it from a different angle. See, they're coming at it from a ground level perspective. So when they receive something from God, it's usually functional. It's usually pushing forward that vision. It's usually, involved in, continuing on things with that community or pushing things forward. Whereas prophets don't get that so much. They might get words of, they get so many different kinds of like words and things like that. And that can be really problematic sometimes, because apostles oftentimes are so like single-minded and singular focus on what they're doing. They have this vision for what God's doing, and just the scope of that vision is just right there. And then you've got this prophet coming in sharing words that are like way over here, and you're just like, no, you're wrong. And the prophets get really mad when you say that. I know from experience. And it's a thing where, like, they're seeing something that God's pointing out to them that is not even within that very linear vision that that the apostles functioning with. And then teachers, oftentimes apostles have that vision and they're functioning on that truth and just obsessed with the truth of getting to that place. And teachers can help or hinder. And that's kind of the same deal here again. So, and like I could continue talking about this kind of interaction and this kind of like convoluted mess of different perspectives and how they clash with each other. But that's not why this video is being posted, and that's not the message that I was given to share. Just like each of the messages so far, this is about what to do with this, okay? I will be abundantly clear. Every single one of all three of these perspectives are absolutely necessary for driving the church forward. for driving the community forward, for developing a healthy, functioning community. You need all three. See, every human being, one of the big problems that you run into in psychology is perspective. See, if you're a psychologist and you have somebody come in sharing their truth, as it were, about what they went through in life and how much their parents hurt them, for example. And I understand, like, this might be a little bit of a minefield, but I'm giving this one example. And that's not to speak about anybody's or past or anything like that. All that I'm speaking of is from the perspective of the psychologists and what they go through sometimes. So they've got this patient who comes in and shares their truth, their perspective of what happened with their parents. And they've been neglected, they've been ignored, they've been left to their own devices all the time, and it's very, very difficult to hear all that. Well, then the psychologist goes and talks to the parent. Turns out it's a single parent, there's only the mom. And because it was only a mom had to work really hard to provide housing and electricity for that kid. So it wasn't an intentional neglect, it was a circumstantial thing where she didn't have a choice. She had to be gone all the time in order to make ends meet.
It's a different way of loving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like, so from her perspective, she was doing the best she could. But the kid didn't see that. All the kid saw and felt was how it felt to be on the receiving end of that. So as a psychologist, you have to kind of learn to work around that and kind of help people see the different perspectives. At that point, it becomes a thing of helping them see and appreciate the fact that mom really was trying to take care of you. But the circumstance was hard. And there wasn't any winning there. Okay? And that's the thing that one of the first things that they tell you in psychology and psychiatry, whichever part, is perspective matters. So when we talk about fivefold ministry and the different offices, the perspectives matter immensely. See, I could spend 2 hours talking about how these three offices clash with each other as they're bringing their own aspects of the truth. However, what we need to do is talk about how to take these aspects of the truth and put them all together to see the truth as much as possible. See, we merge the perspectives into a whole, as opposed to being three opposing things. It's a matter of bringing them together. As far as apostles go, they do have kind of a role of mediating these things. Or, shepherds can do it too. Shepherds can be great mediators. Evangelists can be great mediators. It doesn't matter. The point is that, as people in a group, we have these three kind of perspectives that can be at odds with each other. But it's important for us to bring them together, to help each other see, where you're seeing things, and sometimes, how you're missing something. In that example I gave with an apostle, and suddenly the prophet comes out of left field with something weird, it's important for the apostle to stop and listen. And even though it's hard to get off of that single-minded track, there's truth over here that's going to be just as important as the truth right here.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that they represent the purpose of the truth.
Mm.
So sometimes, when a prophet comes forward with a word, if the apostle doesn't recognize the purpose of that word, right off the bat, then they, have a tendency to just consider it,
Yes.
something that can just wait.
Yeah.
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 And then,
Yeah. That's good. And that's important. Like, we all need to be able to stop and humbly listen to each other. I mean,
and look for why it's true
yes.
instead of is it.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Why it's true, is it true? And teachers always have a harder time with that one because they're much more focused on is it true? And that's another place for them to drop themselves, because the trouble with teachers and kind of like their methodology, if I'm drawing all of my understanding of the world and God specifically, and hear me on this, if I'm drawing my perspective of God from the world around me and from the book in front of me, I need to recognize that that is an extremely limited ability to understand a being that transcends time, space, power, and everything that's comprehensible to us. We're talking about an interdimensional being with untold, unfathomable power who created the entire universe by a word. A book ain't gonna do it, man. Like, it's not. It's never, ever going to encompass the gravity of that being. And the idea that all of God's person and character is going to be contained in a few hundred pages of text is absolutely asinine. So we need to be able to stop and listen to each other, because prophets are going to get weird words, okay? It's going to happen. They're going to sound weird sometimes.
The inner workings of the heart are weird.
Yeah. Prophets are going to get weird words sometimes, and it's not going to be the same wording as out of, Psalm 48 or something like that, because that was written by a guy. There comes a point where we have to start acknowledging, if you're looking at the perspective of like a teacher and everything coming from the ground level, God's not just on the ground level. Like, it is important that you be where you are and appreciate where you are, and that others appreciate where you are, because ground level is extremely important. We all need to stay grounded. I've been to churches that are run by nothing but prophets.
It's a parade.
It's a parade. It's a good way to put it. Yeah, it just doesn't have any structure. And people actually walk away hungry. And I'm not saying that because, that was my experience. That was my experience, in addition to the experience of those around me who also went with. And that was the experience of every person continuously, and even their poor pastor, who kept getting words about needing to develop some structure and feed his sheep. If you have people coming to you routinely, multiple different people, and they're all saying, hey, God told me to tell you, you need to feed your sheep. It's about time you maybe put some grain in the bucket. Like, damn. The point is that, like, we need that structure. We need that grounding. We do need that. But we also need all the other stuff, because God's not on the ground. Well, not just on the ground.
He's all-encompassing.
And for apostles, we need to be able to stop and listen to this other stuff, because that vision, that singular vision, does not actually encompass everything. Okay, if God, and I this is as much for me as anybody else, if God gives a word and says, hey, this is the path, this is the place I'm taking you next. Okay, he's given you an end point, okay? An end point. The road between you and that end point, or this community and that end point, is a blank slate. You don't know what that looks like. All that you know is that you're getting here. And it's foolhardy to not listen to those around you who are part of that community as you get to that point, because you don't know the path. You know the end point because that's what God gave you. You might know some points along the path that God may have given you, but you don't have the whole picture. And it's important to be humble enough to acknowledge that. See, in every single one of these things, there are two major things that we need in order for this to function: humility and mercy. See, the biggest problem that I have seen, experienced, done, and just had seen so many times here at the church, the biggest problem with these three perspectives is pride. See, every apostle, like whether they acknowledge themselves as that or not, most think they're prophets, because apostles don't really exist in the church anymore. So they say. People who have that office have a clear vision that God has given them. And they think that they are the ones meant to carry that, and that is true to a point. However, in all apostles were made, apostles are meant to move the community forward. They're meant to be the foundation builders, the community developers. You look at Paul going around to the various places that he went. He created church after church after church. That's what we do. But that at the same time, and that's a great thing, but building a church, building a community means building a community, not a group of people who you carry on your back. And the thing of it is that, like, and then the thing of it is that you need to be able to understand that they need to develop as well, and they need to grow as well, and you need to take into consideration what they're doing. There's nothing worse than an apostle who helps the prophets grow in their faith and their giftings as prophets, to really understand and appreciate that they are prophets, and then undercuts them every time that they give a word.
That they don't understand.
Especially
the purpose in.
Right. Well, even more than that, just undercuts them because they're lower on the tier.
Oh.
There are so many apostles where they build the church, and other offices are capable of this. Evangelists are infamous for doing this too, where they'll undercut others. It doesn't matter. People in general do this thing. But, for purposes of our message and for purposes of what I'm talking about and who I'm talking to, apostles. Sometimes they can have a hard time letting go of the reins of leadership. And in that process, they can be so abysmal to deal with. Abominable is the word I'm looking for, not abysmal. Abominable. Because they can just stomp through everything, just terrorize their whole church. It's like you spend all this time building this thing, and now the authority, the governing, all those different things are being spread out, and suddenly, oh no, it's not completely under my control anymore. They might screw it up. And then they clench. Yes, they do that, Bear. It's a dangerous thing, but we have to have the humility to recognize that our role is to build the church.
Mm-hmm. And to set them up to be able to, function with or without the apostle.
Right, exactly. The idea, one thing that I think a lot of apostles fail to understand, I feel like it feels bad to say it this way because it's so tongue-in-cheek, in the sense that like I said, most apostles don't know they're apostles. Offices are not a well-known thing in the church here. So, we could reframe it to say community leaders.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll hit some of the people that are
Builders, yeah.
community builders, foundation builders, pastors who have a strong heart cry for community and the development and vision for community. However you identify yourself, the hope is that you get this message and see who you are just a little bit. It's hard that way. But the point is that, when we look at the story of Paul, for example, he built the communities and then he left to go build more communities. And I think sometimes apostles forget that could easily be in the cards for them. So it's incumbent to help that community be able to function without you. Because God might not have you there forever. And that's not to say, the funny thing about fivefold ministry is that, it's supposed to be five offices functioning as leadership in this church together and really building. And, you might have whole teams of each office, doing their thing. But the point is that, you have all five working together, but that doesn't mean that the individual who started at this point will stay in that point. Because God calls us all the time to other things and other places. Sometimes our seasons just come to an end. Sometimes our work is complete. Sometimes it's something else. I'm looking at the positives here, but there are a lot more negatives, and we've all experienced them. I mean, I have my fair share of churches I've been asked to leave from.
Yeah. He can't believe that either.
No, he can't. Harley's just baffled. It's shameful. It really is. So again, back to this point, is having the humility to be willing to step back and not be the central figure. And then with prophets, having the humility to recognize that you are not the sole purveyor of God's word, and that you are capable of mishearing things. You are capable of being wrong. And that I find and have found over and over again is the hardest thing for prophets to accept. See, the thing about being open to the spirit realm is that you don't just hear from God. You'll also hear from other spirits. Now, usually you can discern that. Sure, usually. But I could tell stories. I mean, I tell them in the spiritual warfare series from before about being fooled by demons. I had one who fooled me into thinking, I thought I was hearing God. That feels bad to talk about every time. But it's a reality that we can fall into, especially the more that we drift away from God. And prophets are just as capable of that as anybody else. And you need to be able to recognize that. Sometimes you're going to need that teacher showing up, quoting those scriptures at you, in order to bring you back to the ground, because you're getting someplace that's dangerous. And that's not just, spirit. Sometimes that's just us. Sometimes we want things so bad, or we fall into these places of manufacturing words or manufacturing a destiny from God, that, we can get lost. And it's important for us to be humble enough to be able to let other people bring us back down to earth sometimes. Otherwise, it gets really dangerous. I can think of one prophet off the top of my head who he doesn't do anything as a prophet. He just sits around and writes on Facebook, bitterly sitting in the back of his house. And that's it. He just assumes that he's doing God's work. It's just not even remotely true. God's called him to so many things, and he's blown it every time because he could not accept he was wrong. I mean, he gave the dude gave me a word, and I told him he was wrong, and he kicked me out of his house. And it was just like, dude, this isn't a big deal. You don't need to throw such a temper tantrum about it. But you said I was wrong. You were wrong.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You didn't hear that from God. That's just your own perception.
And prophets are meant to foster intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's often why they leave you spiritually hungry, too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, with prophets, we need that humility. And yeah, like, that's not to say just become steamrolled or anything like that. Really test this stuff. And that's really important. In the Bible, John, in his first letter, writes very distinctly about the testing of spirits. Don't just believe every spirit, he says. And he gives distinct lines on how to test what you're hearing. And that's addressed for prophets just as much as anybody else. It's especially for prophets, though. I mean, and that takes humility. It takes humility to take what you're hearing, pause for a moment and say, oh, let me check and make sure that I'm hearing right. Let me test this a little bit. Play with it a little bit. It takes humility to not just fly off the handle and impetuously assume that what you heard has to absolutely be true. And then we get to teachers and the need for humility with teachers to recognize that you don't always understand everything that you're staring at completely right. I have fought tooth and nail so many people over the scriptures. I hate talking about the Bible. I do. Teachers make my life a nightmare. And it's not because I'm wrong a lot. And more than anything, it's not because of the struggle of it. It's because they get stuff, they have information that's off. And they can't see it. You know, they're looking at the Bible from this perspective. I mean, hell, the fact that I don't believe that in the infallibility of Scripture, most people would consider me a heretic. I'm not. I can find you in the Bible where the Bible itself goes against that. I promise. I've had to do it so many damn times because every person I run into that has like a teacher's gifting or a teacher's office is like, well, you're going to have to prove that. Okay, here are the scriptures. Well, I don't think that's true. Okay, prove it. I can't. We're done talking. But there's this...
The Bible isn't the God.
Exactly. And there's this big thing, and I talked about it during the Office series about teachers and the way that the reason why teachers are this way, why they can be so difficult, is because they really do have this craving for knowledge and this craving for truth that pushes them and pulls them towards finding it as much as possible. So they understand that they really want it that bad. But just because you want it doesn't mean you have it.
That's good.
And we always need to understand that. And that doesn't just go for teachers. I'm using it for teachers because they need to hear it the most, typically. But it also applies to prophets and apostles as much as anybody else who quests and hungers and thirsts for the truth. See, the thing about the truth is that it's kind of an objective thing. It's not something that changes based on how you feel about it. It also matters how you use it. You know, if I tell the truth and use it as a bludgeon to beat somebody over the head with, that's not good. See, the truth is, if we look at the truth as an object, in this sense, it's something to be kind of looked at, observed, turned, and really understood and appreciated, and then absorbed. And it's refreshing. It's so refreshing to find the truth and to have it and to know it and to exist in it. And it's important for us because there's so much chaos in this world. In the Bible it says that how does it phrase it? In the Bible it says that it talks about how this world, as it were, constantly changes in what it believes. It ebbs and flows. In in Ephesians 4, for example, it talks about people being thrown about by the deceitful teachings of every man, like an infant on waves. There are other scriptures where it talks about, I think it's in 1 Corinthians, somewhere in the first 3 chapters. They're all kind of like one long thought talking about the truth of God's truth versus human truth, and human wisdom versus God's wisdom, and how in so many ways the world sees God's wisdom as being silly. Foolish, yes, that's the word. The thing that we run into, though, is that, the world is constantly changing and shifting. I've only been alive for 34 years at this point. And the world as it is right now in 2020, and the perspectives and the values are completely different from what it was in the 1990s. In 1998, 1999, when I was a teenager. It's so different. It's 20 years. It's just 20 years. And everything has just been flipped on its head. And suddenly, we justify bullying because we have the right cause. Whereas when I was a kid in the 90s, the right cause didn't mean that you could bully. People were bullies all the time, but that's because they thought it was funny. When I was in high school, bullying was funny. None of these are good. Bullying's bad in general. It doesn't matter why you do it. It's always bad.
It's the wrong heart.
Yeah, it's the wrong heart. And that's the truth, objectively. When we were teenagers, peer pressure was something that was talked about a lot, because peer pressure was a problem, and it was recognized as something to be overcome. In 2020, we have cancel culture, which uses peer pressure to punish people for doing things that we as a collective deem a group of people as a collective deem as wrong. It's a very different kind of situation. And my point is not to go after our current society, and I'm certainly not going to try to laud the 90s or anything, the late 90s, early 2000s that I was a teenager in. They were just bad in their own way, in different ways. Way too many guys in wife beaters with bleached hair. Mistakes were made, man. Mistakes were made.
They almost started there.
Or maybe the Limp Bizkit fans with the
Same deal.
It was the same deal. In the same deal. Oh my gosh. There was a lot wrong. There's always something wrong, man. The point is that
A time period is just a piece of the full puzzle.
yeah. The point is that truth, when it comes down to God, truth is something that's able to kind of sit and stand in the midst of all of these changing viewpoints and perspectives. It's like a rock in the middle of a river, and you're able to stand on it, and you can watch the river flow around you. See, the truth doesn't really change. Truth is always truth. We can deny it, we can ignore it, we can pretend, we can fight about it. It doesn't change it. And that's the thing about this. That's why we have three perspectives in the fivefold ministry. It's why we have three perspectives that, when brought together, form a whole. And that's something to stand on.
Yeah, look at the Trinity.
Yeah.
It's based on God.
Yeah. This is something to stand on. If we bring together the vision, everything from ground level and everything coming straight from God, and put it into one whole thing, that's incredibly powerful. Not only is it life-changing, but it's something that an entire community can be built on, developed on. And, for each one of these people, guys, continue to hunger and thirst for the truth, especially in these times. Like, there is so much misinformation. There's so much politicizing. There's so much drama. There are so many people. I felt like I was supposed to talk about this, and it's an important thing, I think. The thing is that, like, when I first, I've talked before about how me as a person, I went through a phase of, like, debating people a lot. And I did it because I thought it was fun. It was good sport in a lot of ways. But I would win all the time. And it wasn't like my intention in it was trying to find the truth. Because, see, I came from a background of trying to pursue a zoology degree. And the thing about a scientific background is that in science, one of the great legs up that the scientific community has over every other community that I know of is that they're interested in the truth. So when two scientists get into a debate, it's not usually, in general, it's not usually about, one scientist proving the other scientist wrong and then being able to beat his chest at the top of the mountain and proclaim his truth as the truth. Instead, it's both of them bringing their personal information, what they have, and bringing it together to find the truth. Later, I found myself involved with the church. That is not how the church does it. It is not. It is not. And politics, even more so, not how they do it. There's no interest in the truth, okay? Like, in the church, everyone says they have an interest in the truth. They lie about this. Because most of the time what happens is if you argue about it or debate it, what most people are looking for is to have their beliefs validated. They're not interested in what's actually true. What they're interested in is having what they believe already be proclaimed as true, as accurate. That way they don't have to change anything. That way they don't have to have their morals or their standards questioned or even found completely wrong.
They're looking to convert you.
Mm-hmm. Again, this goes back to the humility thing. It's so incredibly important. Like, you have no idea. The whole thing about growing in God is that you grow. There's no growth if you're just pridefully standing on dead bones of false facts, okay? And then we get into politics, and politics has no interest in the truth, okay? You guys need to understand that. And I don't just say that because I'm like embittered by it or anything like that. When you have a debate club, the entire prospect of the debate club is that you debate about an issue and then you win your debate by out debating the other person. It doesn't matter who's right. It doesn't matter what's true. What you're interested in is winning. And that's what they train people in for politics, is their focus is not on the truth. It's about winning. It's about getting your way. And that's kind of the prerogative. And I think that a lot of people forget this, especially right now. Everything's so politicized and everyone's fighting about it. It's like watching a bunch of people like being puppeteered by somebody, by some great puppeteer. And it's a little bewildering at times. And it's times like this where we need those truths to come together to not become, marionettes to some greater power. And that's important because it's not a power that's trying to bring people together. It's one that is trying to divide people. And we need to understand and appreciate that. Just because you disagree with somebody doesn't mean that you need to end your friendship or whatever. Listen to each other. Learn from each other. And if you're one of these people who just hungers and thirsts for truth, keep doing that and share that truth. And be open to have it being challenged. Be humble. And also, be merciful. If you're the kind of person who has a very clear picture of the truth, and you know you're right, that doesn't mean you use that truth to just bludgeon the hell out of every other person. No, help them see it too. Because they need it. We all need this. We all need the truth at this point in time so badly. Clear images of it. That refreshing feeling of truth just washing over you when you realize, this is what's real. This is the reality. Right now when I was in basic training, they talked about one of the issues with barracks talk, which was that the privates would sit around and say things that they heard from other privates. And the drill sergeants were very clear about not taking part in that because, as they put it, you guys don't know anything. Well, here's the problem. I remember being there and seeing that, and they put me in charge of people, and I was just bewildered by it because I knew stuff. I was the bookman for, the first platoon I was in. And then when I got pulled from training and had to be put in charge of all the people that were being processed out, I again knew how things were going because I was the one who was talking to the senior drill sergeant directly and getting our orders. And everyone would talk around me and get mad at me for not believing the same things that they believed. And I just sat there bewildered because I'm just like, guys, I'm literally the guy holding the information. Why are you fighting with me about this? Well, because they would sit around and talk to each other and come up with these weird ideas, and that's what it came out to be. And suddenly they're attacking the person who literally read the books, read the entire plan for the entire AIT that we were in, and could remember points and things and different things like that. And suddenly they're telling me I'm wrong. It was frustrating. But
it's all about what you want. If you want to win, you're going to approach things that way. If you want the truth, You'll come humbly.
Yeah. But, out of mercy, I didn't, beat them over the head for it or, mock them when they should. Well, okay, one time I did mock one of the guys when he came back from the training session, and I told him exactly what they were going to do. And he was just like, "You don't even know Jakort." I'm just like, "Dude, I read the whole plan." So when he came back, I literally was just like, "So how was the night training? Did you do the things that I told you were going to do?" "Shut up, Jakort." Yeah. Then I rubbed my nipples and walked away. You're welcome for that.
Right. And this has a lot to do with truth.
It has everything to do with Jesus and truth and stuff.
That's where pride can take you.
Stop it. Anyway, the thing is that generally, except for that one time, I tended to opt to be merciful about it because, I understood that they didn't know. And that's the thing is, I don't know why we punish each other for ignorance. I understand, when we are dealing with people who are willfully ignorant, but it's hard to, judge willful ignorance versus legitimate ignorance when all that you're doing is, fighting with each other.
That's not an atmosphere that you're going to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. And what's more is pride and abusive and an abusive tone are never going to break through that ignorance. In fact, you actually might cause them to galvanize themselves in that better word, entrench themselves in that perspective, in that lie, purely because you're being an ass. Mercy and humility go much further in helping people see the truth and helping people even be willing to disarm themselves, especially right now. Everybody's so spiky. We need to be coming at people with kindness more than anything and more than ever. And if you are carrying truth with you, if you know, help them see it, because people are needing that for real.
Sometimes helping them see it is, them being able to see you be humble.
Yeah.
And not hitting them over the head with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a thing. I mean, I don't have a whole lot more to say pertaining to this, except to go back and listen to each other. Be humble, be merciful. Be humble to those who critique you or challenge you. Be merciful to those who don't know. More than anything, as a group, as people, listen to each other. And to be specific to the offices, if you're a teacher, be willing to listen to the apostles or the prophets around you, because they're bringing you perspectives, and if you really want to know more truth, they're going to help you see more truth than you've ever seen before. Apostles, you don't have the whole picture, man. Listen to the people around you. If you want to help build them up, help build them up. That means putting them in positions where they're going to be able to challenge you. And that's a good thing. And prophets, be willing to hear from the others, because sometimes you need to come back to the ground. They're not challenging you to shame you or punish you. Sometimes they're challenging you because they're worried for you. And they're right to be. And evangelists and shepherds, truth's important. It's real important. Really important. listen to the other guys. And it's important to say, as far as the thing about what works and whatnot, that's also valid. If the truth is too stark or too harsh, you can help them sometimes blunt it. It should never be thrown out in order to do what works. Like, people can debate me about that, and I don't care. I'm not even going to engage because it's a waste of time.
Yeah, and if
But
you want the fullness of Christ,
yeah,
this is the only way.
yeah,
You're just not going to find it all on your own.
right. But at the same time, like, sometimes we need help. Like, I know Jeremy has helped. I used to, like, run things through Jeremy sometimes before saying them, just because he would help me, like, not, rather than, like, telling the truth in a way that made the other person feel like I had stabbed them with a knife and then lifted them on said knife and then shook them until I was covered in their blood, and then took a picture with them and sent it to their mother. Rather than it looking like that, he would help me deliver it in a way that was gentle and kind and actually pleasant sometimes.
Yeah, able to get through to people.
More like a stern back rub, as opposed to all that other stuff. It's important. Sometimes this stuff can be really important, because sometimes truth with God is really hard.
Yeah. Oh, amen.
Like, sometimes God's going to have, your prophet or your apostle deliver words that suck. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt, because sometimes we just don't want to see the truth. Or we don't see it. We can't see it. And then when we see it, it does feel like we've just been run over by a car. And then the car took a picture with our crumpled up body and sent it to our mom.
And then shook us.
It's one of those things, like, we all have value here in this particular arena. We all have something to offer. And it's always something to remember within these, like, messages about the offices and so on. But and then the last thing that I feel like I'm supposed to say is to abide in the truth. Let it be something that you can stand on, that you can grow in, that can help refresh you. Even when it's hard, it's meant for good. God's never going to try to, like, just punish you with it. He is, however, going to try to help you grow and move forward in a way. And it's going to be a lot harder if you choose to keep doing it your way, as opposed to just, like, listening, following, being there, being present. It's important. And the truth is, and the reality is, that for God, He does not have a desire for us to sit in darkness and doubt and confusion. That's not His way. He's always, all that talk in the Bible about light and being a light in the darkness and so on, that's not just for funsies. It just so happens that Jesus believes in that. And that's important for us to remember too. Listen to each other. Really listen to each other and test those spirits.
And love truth more than
Yeah.
love the truth.
Anyway. And that's what I got for this one. So we'll see you guys in the next one. And hopefully soon enough here in person.